So is there an environmental crisis or not? That's often how the question gets framed. Is climate change something to worry about? Is melting of the Arctic and the Antarctic ice a polarizing debate in your country as much as it is in the U.S.? What about pollution? What about air, water, land pollution? What about hazardous waste? What about overpopulation? And what people have argued is overconsumption. What about biodiversity? The idea that life itself means there must be a certain amount of diversity of species for life itself to exist. Well, one way to think about this is to think, we have to wait for the facts. Science will tell us whether or not there's an environmental crisis, and we just have to wait for more studies. Now, the problem with this idea is that it turns on thinking about science as if it's value-free, as if it's just the facts, and that's all science tells us. But we know that science itself, the questions that we ask and the way we frame these questions, even the methods we use, have values built into them. This was demonstrated to me by a professor of mine named Richard Rudner, now long passed away. He wrote a paper called The Scientist Qua Scientist. The scientist as scientist makes value judgments. And he talked about in the 1940s, Enrico Fermi, a physicist, was involved in the Manhattan Project for the first nuclear bomb. And they were doing what was essentially the first nuclear chain reaction. And as I told the story, they all knew that the probability of this nuclear reaction happening and turning the entire atmosphere into sand was very small. I mean, very small, but also non-zero. And the scientists had to decide that doing this experiment, the possible benefits outweighed the very, very tiny risk. And we know that the atmosphere didn't turn to sand because we're all here. But nonetheless, the scientists have to make value judgments. And this is true in the environment too. So this idea that the scientists will tell us the facts and then we get on with it, it doesn't exactly work. That's not to say that scientific studies aren't relevant, but using judgment to sort out which are relevant, what they tell us, and then trying to make wise policy decisions is a very complicated process. Other people argue, we've got to act now, we've got to save the planet. And I've always thought that I didn't have much interest in this argument because I've always thought the planet was going to be fine. I mean, we may not be here, but I'm pretty sure the planet will be. The third argument here is that we've really already lost so many species that the biodiversity can't really support life. Again, I'm not sure if this is right. I am sure that if it is right, we better take some time and try to find another place to live. We better take some time and figure out how to increase the diversity of species. The subtext of these arguments in environmentalism is that it is really the dominant story of business in the background. Business is often assumed to be the problem, not the solution. And I'd like to turn the tables on that partially. One way I've thought about this is to think about something I've called our children's future. Blaise Pascal was a French philosopher in I think the 18th century, maybe it was the 17th, it was a long time ago. And Pascal formulated an argument. He's a famous mathematician, philosopher. He formulated an argument that said, suppose all these people talking about Christianity are right. He was not a Christian. Suppose they're right. Suppose there really is a hell. Well, hell is hot and eternity is a long time. And living a Christian life is not too bad. So maybe we should do that just in case. Well, what if all these environmentalists are right? Will our children have the same prospects for a future that we do? I believe we have to take this seriously. Can business leaders act as if there's an environmental crisis, regardless of how the facts, if there are any, turn out? Can we continue to create value and trade with each other? Can we continue to improve the well-being of our stakeholders? In other words, rather than, is there an environmental crisis, I want to turn the tables to say, is there a green capitalism? Can we think about capitalism from the standpoint of how we make the world cleaner, safer, better for our children, and how our companies can make our societies better, improve the standard of living for its stakeholders, and make money? I think the answer to that's yes. And we're seeing the emergence of many different kinds of business models which help to address these environmental issues. What I'd like you to think about in the discussion forums is, what obligations do we owe to our children? What obligations might we owe to future generations? Can business be a part of the solution to our environmental issues? And I want you to discuss 2 or 3 companies whose businesses are built on addressing environmental issues.